All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started so that I can, first of all, thanks for being on time. I appreciate it. First of all, welcome to this webinar. We're to learn more about transitioning your licensing school to an online format. My name is Amy Walker, and I manage the course of study school for Emory, and I also have directed the licensing school for North Georgia and South Georgia for the last 4 years. Before we jump in, a couple of quick housekeeping notes that I'm sure at this point you're all Zoom experts on. First of all, keep in mind this is being recorded. So if you do not want to be on the recorded version of this, we highly suggest you mute both your video and your mic so that we can't see you jumping up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the presentation or anything like that. Feel free to go ahead and do that now. We're going to handle any questions you have that come up during the presentation. If you will do us a favor, because there are so many people on this, Pamela Frost is monitoring the chat box for me. So type your question in the chat box, and at the end of each section, I'm going to stop and ask questions that are specific to that section. And then at the very end, we'll do an overall big Q&A for any big questions you have about the program in general. But if you're having a technical issue, we're going to ask you in the participants box, there's a little blue hand icon that says raise hand. If you will raise your hand if you're having a technical issue, Pamela or Dina can jump on and help you on the back end, get back up and have everything ready to go again. So we'll have those two things. So any questions about the presentation, write in the chat box. Any questions that you're having technical problems with, raise your hand in the participant box and we'll get somebody to help you out real quick. All righty. Before we get started, if y'all don't mind, if you'll bow with me, let's say a word of prayer before we start. Gracious God, thank you for this day you've given us. Thank you for the people you have brought here together. I thank you for their passion for educating the ministers in their care. And I pray that we will all feel supported in the endeavors to do just that. Right now, especially, I pray that you surround us all with your peace as we move and live into a whole new way of being in ministry with each other. Grant us immeasurable amounts of grace with ourselves, with our teachers, and with our students. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So 2 years ago, I started to move parts of Emory's licensing school online, and I quickly found out that I would basically have to start from scratch. And this verse from Mark came to mind, and I wanted to share that with you guys today because I think it's super relevant still, and I remind myself of it often. It says, it's Mark 2:22. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is lost, and so are the skins. But one puts new wine into fresh wineskins. I found that the phrase that I started really hating that people told me on a regular basis when we were trying to do this was, just move it online. It became kind of a curse word for me because nobody would understand how difficult it is to move stuff online. And that was one of the things I wanted to do during this when Shannon asked me to lead this, was to walk you through the process of moving things online and what that looks like and all of the steps you have to do to think through how best to do that for your students. For instance, the old way that we here at Emory used to do is we would do 16 of the 80 hours online and then 64 hours residential spread over 8 days here on campus. And that worked really well for us. And each year I was planning to add a little bit more and a little bit more so that our goal was to move almost half and half. I love licensing school, is one of my favorite things. I think it has a whole lot of really helpful tools for students, but overall, even above academics and the things that they learn, the concept of community building is paramount. And so for me, having to move all of this online because of the virus and Emory closed down, so everything closed down, it was difficult for me to think through how can we do this in a way that they're both learning and still getting to know each other to build that community that is rock solid, that leads them through either a course of study together or if they're going on to seminary. So this was our old way. Our new way is having trouble because I'm supposed to stop sharing here. Oh, that's fine. So sorry. Okay, well, y'all don't get to see my beautiful PowerPoint presentation. Oh, there it is. There we go. Our new way of doing it is 80 hours online. Obviously, all of it's going online. And then we're spreading it over 4 to 7 weeks. We are working with, I think we're up to 24 annual conferences right now. I've figured out a way to allow the conferences to decide when they start and when they stop. So some of them decided to give the students 4 weeks to do the program. Some of them have gone as long as 7 weeks. The way I set it up and the way we'll talk about throughout here is it's all asynchronous, and we're going to talk about that as well. But that's why they can start and stop at their own pace. So these are the subjects we're going to cover today. The first is curriculum content, how we can set it up, how will your students respond to the content, and how you will evaluate those responses. Then we're going to move into delivery platforms. So you've got your content figured out. Now we have to figure out how to get it to the students. And then the third thing we're going to work on is training. How do you talk to your teachers, your students, and we'll talk a little bit about tech producers and how amazing they are. And the last thing we'll look at are best practices in online education. Some stuff that I've learned both the hard way and the easy way, but mainly the hard way. So the first thing to think through is there's really 2 types of curriculum content. Students are either going to be reading something that you want them to read to learn from, or they're going to be listening to somebody that you want them to learn from. So the first thing we're going to look at are books. If you were at the GBHEM licensing school directors meeting late last year, you will remember that Shannon was awesome and let us be more creative with our curriculum. You no longer have to go by the book list that we used to use in years past. However, with that freedom also comes the responsibility of getting it approved by GBHEM. So when I found this out, I started doing some research for what I wanted for Emory, and this is what I came up with for our required book list. And this is not by any means telling you this is perfect. This is just perfect for us. And I got this has been approved by Shannon and ready to go. So this is what we're using this year. You'll notice it's pretty basic. There's a study Bible, and we do make people get the same study Bible, mainly because we're getting them to read pages together. And I want them to all be reading the same version and the same translation and all of that stuff, because I don't want to deal with, hey, I have a different page number, or I'm reading the NIV and I'm reading the Message. Just we're all doing one. I think ours is NRSV. Book of Discipline and Book of Worship. These are 2 books they should all have already. This Holy Mystery and By Water and the Spirit. If you did not know, and I hope you did, these are available for free online for students to download, so they don't actually have to buy the book if they don't want to. I like the book. I know I have By Water and the Spirit, This Holy Mystery in my office, and I love it. But it's nice that they can buy 2 of the books. 2 of the books are just free for them. And this last book, the United Methodist Clergy Book of First, is awesome. I cannot recommend it highly enough. I read it last year, and so I have worked in a church for 11 years before I started working at Emory. And then I've been doing this, like I said, for 4 or 5 years. I'm in my 5th year now. And there were still things I learned by reading that book. He wrote it perfectly for licensing school students. It's a lot of very practical tips that you sometimes remember to tell them in licensing school, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we just run out of time, and this is a great resource for them to be able to go back to. The other thing that I love about it is that the table of contents is separated beautifully, so that if they just have a quick question about one very specific topic, they don't have to read the whole book over again to be able to get that knowledge. They can go in and read 1 to 2 to 5 pages, and they're done, and that's the end of it. It's really well done. So you might want to take a look at that as well. Then we've got lectures. So we've got your books, and then we've got lectures. So 2 ways to do lectures. You can do asynchronous, which is not live, and you can do synchronous, which is live, which is what we're doing now. I decided we were going to do completely asynchronous this year, mainly because of a couple of reasons. There's positives and negatives to both, so please don't hear me say you shouldn't do synchronous. There's great positives to that. Here's why I decided we were doing asynchronous. One, I knew we were going to be working with more than my normal 2 conferences. So I knew we were going to have a lot of people in different time zones, which was going to be a problem for us. And some of you, I know your conferences split time zones, so that might be a problem for you as well to consider. Second of all, a lot of people in both South Georgia and North Georgia, and every other conference, to be honest, have trouble with internet access, either access in general or access to high-speed internet, which is actually, you almost have to have high-speed internet access to do synchronous stuff. Otherwise, they're going to be so frustrated by all the buffering that's going on. It's not worth it, in my opinion, to sit there and try to figure that out. So we decided we were going to do that. The other part of it is that any of our part-timers, most of our part-timers, I would say, have full-time jobs on the side, secular jobs that they're doing in addition to their part-time ministry jobs. And so trying to get everybody to be online at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday is just not feasible, especially when you have to keep going in your content. You can't just, oh, somebody missed the topic on weddings. How do we get them to make that up, right? That's a nightmare. And I think every year I have somebody who needs to make up something, and trying to get them back in that loop is really difficult. But if everything is asynchronous, you can tell them, hey, here's the packet of information you missed, and here's what you need to work through for the stuff that you missed, which is helpful. So I want to stop there real quick and answer any questions before I move on. If Pamela tells me we have any questions.
One person wanted to know if they would be able to get a copy of the PowerPoint, or if just the recording would be available.
Oh, this is a great question. The recording is definitely going to be available. I will make a condensed version of the PowerPoint available, yes.
Okay. How long do you think each section would last?
Each section?
Of this
of what?
PowerPoint.
I don't think I'm following the question. I'm sorry.
Will you just stop this first section, of your presentation?
I don't know.
Okay. Somebody wanted to know NRSV or CEB for Bible.
Oh, that's not, this is probably a GBHEM question, not an Amy Walker question.
Okay.
Yeah. I think you should use lots of translations, and we build that really hard into our licensing school students and our course of study students, is that they should have 5 or 6 books, 5 or 6 translations on their shelf. Like, that's just, to me, if you're only using one, it's bad. You can't, exegesis is best done with multiple translations. We use NRSV. I think it's just the one my teacher, the one that's teaching exegesis this year, is using. So I just stuck with hers. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I phrased that question wrong. How long is each session of the teaching that students are engaging with?
Oh, okay. So that's a great question. It's going to vary. But what I do is there's a guideline. It's a table. I think it's in our licensing school handbooks. I think so. If it's not, I'll get it for you guys. But it lists the different subject areas and the suggested hours, contact hours that you should be using with each one. And there's some flexibility in that, clearly. I have chosen, we're going to go at Emory, we're just going straight down the line. So for instance, like pastoral care, spiritual formation, education, leadership and administration, they're all 8 contact hours each. But then preaching jumps to 16. Worship and liturgy is 12. Tradition is 8. It makes me sad that I have all these memorized, I just realized. So it depends on what you're going to do. If you find one subject you want to hammer home a little bit more, and so you take a little bit from one and move it to the other, that's fine. I found it to be it works really well for us. So I would kind of suggest just sticking with the regular guidelines. Yeah.
Okay. Lindsay wanted to know what courses Emory offers. do you want to direct her to the website or?
Courses for licensing school, I assume?
She didn't specify. Lindsay, are you talking about licensing school or course of study? While we're waiting on that,
Yeah.
Glenn wanted to know if you record a live session, can you use it for those to catch up if they miss it?
You can. If it goes well, you can. Yep.
Someone said, are these the same guidelines for course of study? And Marcia Middleton actually said biblical translation is addressed in GBHEM guidelines for licensing school.
There we go. What was the question right before the translation question?
Are these the same guidelines for course of study?
So probably. I run both. I'm running licensing school exactly like I run course of study. And you'll see at the very end, we're going to talk about how to calculate online contact hours. And that's the exact same. I use it across the board. Licensing school. So at Emory, our course of study, they're all hybrid classes, which means anywhere between 25 to 50% of the work is asynchronous online before they meet us in person. And that's how I was running licensing school as well. We never did anything synchronous. Again, time zones, technical problems, all of the above. So yeah, I don't see any difference really. Yeah.
So going back to Lindsay's questions about what courses Emory offers, she was talking about licensing school.
Yeah, I stick with that list from GBHEM exactly. So it's tradition, public worship and liturgy, preaching, pastoral care, education, spiritual formation, leadership and administration, mission, and evangelism. Yeah, 9.
Okay. David wants to know, how can we be more attentive of the different learner styles?
Yep. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. So I'm going to put that one on hold.
Okay. And then one person's thought, how might we demonstrate in this training best practices for how long students should sit in front of the computer when engaged in learning online?
Amen. Yeah, we're going to talk about that too.
Okay.
Hold that thought. These are great questions. Yeah.
That is the end of the questions from the chat session. Okay,
perfect. I'm going to go back in because I think y'all are getting ready to move into the next part of questions anyway, which is great. Let me do. I'm so sorry. See, this is why I hate Synchronous right here. Because give me 1 second. I wonder if we do it this way, if this will be. See if that doesn't work any better. There we go. All right, so this is moving into the section about once you've decided what your curriculum is going to be, how will students respond to that curriculum, to what you're teaching them and what they're reading. So the 4 things that I use are papers, discussion boards, quizzes, and demonstrations. So we're going to walk through each one of them real quickly. When I say papers, I don't mean academic papers with bibliographies and citations or anything like that. I'm talking about 1 to 2 page papers that are mainly focused in big topic areas. So for instance, one of the things we're doing is I am a big fan of giving them real life situations that they can talk us through how they will handle when they're in a pulpit. For example, this year, one of our questions starts off with the scenario, one of your church members just came to you fresh from an Emmaus weekend. They feel transformed. It was a hugely positive experience for them. And to mark that, they want to be rebaptized because they feel like they have just been transformed and there's this new life and there's this energy and this joy, which is all awesome. And we're really grateful and loving that. How do you, as a minister, talk to them about how we don't rebaptize and how, as a minister, can give them alternative ways of celebrating this moment in their life and being grateful and honoring it without rebaptizing. So teaching them, hey, here's how you're going to have to tell people we don't do that. So we hear a little bit of their theology around that. And then tell us how you're going to turn that into a positive for this person. Because what I tend to look for when students start talking about rebaptism in general is I don't want to see the red flags of I just do it. I just rebaptize them because they asked nicely, right? Huge red flag. But I also don't want them to be the person who just says no and doesn't give that member any other opportunity to be celebrated. We've all seen people come back from mission trips, church retreats, Emmaus walks, Kairos weekends, all of these great things that they're involved with. And if they've had a transformative experience, we want to honor that. And so we need to help our students think through, how do you honor that without rebaptizing? So that's just one example. That's why papers I tend to do just in the sacraments and theology sections, stuff that's a little bit more, little deeper. We want to hear their thought process a little bit more. That's where we do those. With the discussion boards, I do at least one per subject area, and I listed those 9 subject areas earlier. So each one of those has something that I want them to discuss. And they're always more than a yes or a no question. So instead of asking what is your favorite color blue, I want to ask, why is your favorite color blue? And then I'm going to require them to respond to at least 2 other students on that discussion board so that there's some community, not only community building, which we want and need, but there's also some critical thought going into it. I'm looking for things like, oh, Amy said she loves the color blue because it reminds her of the ocean and she loves water. That's awesome. So now I'm going to turn it into this community building activity of, oh, I was just at the beach and I love the beach too. And here, yeah, and this is a silly example, obviously, but to get them to connect on different parts with each other and to be able to delve a little deeper into subject areas where they're actually saying, oh, I hear you. I get that. I have that too. Let's talk about that a little bit more and kind of work through that. With quizzes, I use these fairly sparingly, and I tend to use them for subject areas that are objective. So I use them, we have a couple with tradition where we're talking about, we've got some John Wesley stuff in there where we're just trying to make sure they got some big points, right? Like some big check marks. I'm never trying to trip up students. I think I'm not a big fan of that in any program, much less licensing school where they're learning some of this stuff for the first time. I am just trying to make sure they've understood and read some big points that if they don't walk away with knowing these things, one of us has failed, me or them, right? So that I don't use them often, but they are crazy helpful when you're doing something objective. And then demonstration. So when we do this hybrid, licensing school hybrid like we normally do, I don't do this. But there were 3 areas that I was most concerned about with moving everything online, and that was around the sacraments and preaching. Normally when we're together during the sacraments, and I'm very fortunate, Bishop Larry Goodpastor is on staff with us at Candler right now as Bishop in Residence, and he actually gets all of the students to stand up with him, and he teaches them all of the hand motions over communion, and they mimic that with him and practice that. And then we also do baptism that way, and everybody walks through kind of what baptism feels like and how you should hold the baby and use warm water and all of these very practical things. So what we're going to do this year is they're going to have to walk through a baptism and a communion, videotape it and send it to us. And we're doing that through, if they have a YouTube channel or a Vimeo channel through their church, which right now, lots of them do. All of a sudden, even the tiniest little churches know how to put stuff online now. And then also they'll have the opportunity to put it on DVD, which almost everybody can do one of those. Obviously, there's going to be grace built in for people who are having legitimate technical problems, so we'll deal with that. But and then the last thing is preaching, and this was the thing I was kind of honestly most grieved by, that we weren't able to do this year, which is at the end of our school, at least on the last day, they are in groups of 5 or 6 and they preach to each other with preaching evaluators in the room. And it's just an interesting way to end your week together. It's very community building. And it's nice that they can see different styles of preaching and how their friend who might be really quiet, that's usually sits quietly at lunch, is super dramatic in the pulpit and likes to yell and move their arms. And these are things that I think are really interesting for them to be able to watch. So I'm a little sad about that. But again, a couple of our conferences that I've talked to have decided that they're gonna actually hold off on that piece, the actual preaching part of it, and they're gonna do that in person once we're able to meet in person again, which is great. I don't have any problems with that. I think that works out just fine. But again, I think I'm less worried about it. I'm less worried about the technical aspect of it this year because of the situation we already find ourselves in. So I think that might be okay. Let me I'll stop real quick and ask Pamela if we have any questions just about this student response stuff.
Well, I'm not sure if it's about student response, but we have had some questions.
Okay.
One person wanted to know, what is a discussion board?
Great question. So discussion board, if you're on Facebook, those are discussion boards basically. If somebody types in something on Facebook and then you see people replying to that person, that's a discussion board. That's all they're very simple. We will put up for hours where I'm going to put in the question. I will be the originator of the discussion board, and then people will reply to me or to their fellow students within it to keep that discussion going.
Okay. One person wanted to know, for extension course of study, do they have access to Moodle or ways to have discussion boards, that kind of thing?
So that's a GBHEM question.
Okay.
I don't know what GBHEM offers other schools for learning management systems.
I can save that for later.
Yeah.
One person wanted to know, how do sacraments work for deacons in licensing school?
Ooh, I don't know that we've had any deacons in licensing school, to be honest. We teach everybody to do it. So, I mean, deacons can be given permission, obviously, with extenuating circumstances for sacramental rites if they're under an elder, or their DS can give it to them if there's some special occasion that they need to be consecrating at and an elder is not present. But we teach everybody how to do it. So it doesn't matter to me if you're going to be an elder or a deacon. If you want to stay licensed local, it doesn't matter. We teach all of them.
Let's see. I think that was it. If I've missed a question, please let me know. Anybody, if I've missed yours in the chat window. Yeah,
and again, we're going to have a big Q&A time at the end. So I just want to make sure I'm not going past a good question for any of these specific sections. So yeah.
And if I tell you a question and you want me to hold it till the end, let me know and we'll come back to it. But somebody asked, what technology do you use for online courses?
We're getting there. Yep.
Okay.
Great. Was that it for now?
I think so.
Cool. All right, let's move on to the next one. So this is the technology part that we're going to talk about. How do you deliver the content? In an ideal world, you would use a learning management system. And the three that I am most familiar with, there are probably hundreds of others. I've used Canvas. We use Canvas at Emory, so I use it all the time for course of study. I also use it for licensing school when it's just us. Moodle I've used as a student. I've never used as an administrator. And Blackboard, which we used to use at Emory before we got Canvas. The pro of having a learning management system for your licensing school is that all of your materials are in one place. That's beautiful. The con is that normally, if you're not using the free version, they are expensive. If you start looking into them, I know Moodle has a free version. I don't know if Canvas or Blackboard does, but I know Moodle does. I think it's a matter of doing your research. Again, once you figure, that's why this is in order, right? You have to figure out your content first, then go to how am I going to deliver this? Because if you find that you don't care about discussion boards or you don't care about whatever, you can manage, you'll know what you need in your learning management system once you've figured out what content you're going to use and how you're going to use it. So in an ideal world, you would have a learning management system. In Amy's world right now, I'm in what I like to call make it happen mode, which is Band-Aids. These are the things that I'm personally using for Emory this year. We had too many people register for licensing school to be able to put everybody in Canvas. And that's an Emory thing that doesn't have anything to do with anything y'all need to worry about. So what I decided to do was we're going to use Jotform for our quizzes, which if you're familiar with Jotform, it's awesome. And it's perfect for setting up quizzes. We're going to use Facebook for discussion boards because that is what Facebook is good at and it's super user friendly. And we're going to use Vimeo and YouTube for asynchronous videos. And I'm going to tell you the difference, one of the main differences between Vimeo and YouTube, a couple of differences. One, Vimeo, we're using for our original content that we have developed. I have asked lots of professors and ministers to film very specific topics for me for licensing school. And those are all copyrighted and I put them on Vimeo. They are password protected so that unless we've been paid for it, you don't get access to it. And that's mainly, I respect the intellectual content of my teachers and you should too. And two, we don't want students to download it and manipulate it in any way, shape, or form. So that's what I do with Vimeo. We're also using YouTube links. And I'll tell you my favorite thing that I found, one of my favorite things that I found about putting everything online is that there is already a lot of awesome material out there. The United Methodist Communications and United Methodist, I think it's Commission on History and Archives, all have YouTube channels. If you have not been around to see them, I highly suggest you Google it after we're done here. They're awesome. We have multiple, I'm using the ones just off the top of my head that I remember I'm using. They've got 2-minute videos on prevenient grace, sanctifying grace, justifying grace, 2 minutes, just quick to get through a big concept. We're using stuff on history. There's an awesome video on Charles Wesley, an awesome one on Susanna Wesley, a little one on Christmas, the Christmas conference. We're using all of those so that when students see their syllabus with these like 10 or 12 videos that they need to watch on tradition alone, they can see the running time. I put the running time of videos on my syllabus on purpose so that students see, oh, this is only going to take 2 minutes, or this is only going to take 4 minutes. None of our videos, and this is a best practice, don't go over 15 minutes on your videos. If you've got somebody who's used to talking for an hour in class, you need to have them break that up into smaller bite-sized segments. And what I suggest is we are making things incredibly subject specific. So for instance, in leadership and administration, I asked somebody to do a video on introduction to the book of discipline. And that's literally all they talk about in that one video. And the whole purpose of that is to help the student see how easily it is. These little bite-sized chunks are not psychologically overwhelming, but also if they forgot something and just legitimately need to watch something really quick, they can go back very quickly and just watch that 10 minutes rather than watch an hour online lecture, which doesn't tend to be very, it's not an efficient use of their time. If you're going to go synchronous, right now, obviously we're on Zoom. Most people are using Zoom. I highly suggest Zoom. I think it works great. There are other platforms. I'm not as familiar with them, so I don't want to recommend something I haven't used myself. If you're going to use Zoom, you definitely need to have it password protected. We've all learned, unfortunately, about Zoom bombing lately with people you don't know jumping on your calls and sometimes putting up inappropriate and or offensive content. You just don't need that to happen. So slap a password on there. I also, as a secondary measure, put in a waiting room, which you can do when you put your Zoom call together, which you all noticed because you all had to be in the waiting room until Pamela checked you off our list and you were allowed in. So those two things you just kind of want to keep in mind when you're building it out. The other great thing about Zoom is that when you have any class that is larger than you would like it and you want to put people in breakout rooms for discussions, you can. There's a way to do that. So if you have 20 people in your licensing school and you want to do small group, real-time discussion groups, that's what Zoom is good at. You as the director can put people into groups. You can have 5 groups of 4, and immediately you've got a group that can actually talk to each other without talking over each other and having lots of problems on that side of it. And we're going to talk a little bit more in a minute about a tech producer to help the teacher. I was on actually, I'm going to save that for 1 minute because it's in the next section. I'm going to stop real quick and take questions about delivery platform questions.
Well, Amy, somebody had a question earlier, and I didn't know if it was best held to the end. How can an annual conference connect to use Candler's online licensing school?
We'll talk about that at the end. Great question.
Okay. Someone wanted to know, they're assuming that for Facebook discussion, it is a closed group.
It is. Great question. They're private groups. Yep. Okay. So for Emory, for instance, when I said we've got 24, everybody has their own Facebook group. So when the conference reps are reading the discussion boards, they're only looking at their students.
One person wanted to know if they could see the syllabus prior to the start of the licensing school.
They can see the part that's done.
Okay. And then, let's see. I had a suggestion when you were talking about Zoom bombing.
Sure.
Somebody makes it past the password in the waiting room, there is an option to lock screen sharing to the host only. So if somebody gets in, you can keep them, they can listen, but they can't share inappropriate things if you've made that option available.
That's awesome tip. Thank you for adding that in. Yeah. Any other questions?
Said they had a suggestion that it would be helpful to get the paid version so you can have longer sessions on Zoom.
I agree. Yep.
That's a suggestion, but
I agree.
Those were the questions that we had so far.
Anytime, I mean, with any of these platforms, you're going to get, free, you get what you pay for. I mean, we all know this. So you're going to have some, there's going to be stuff that you don't get access to because you're not paying them for that access. And that's how it works. So once you start playing in them and getting on them, do the free trial, play with it long enough to realize what's missing, what's going to be a problem for you that it's missing, and then decide if it's worth buying for your conference, for your stuff. If it's worth it, then it's worth it and use it, but if it's not, then go on to try something else. Yeah.
There was one suggestion posted just now, just in case anybody doesn't see it in the chat. Zoom continues to enhance their security. They've also added a security icon today. So
great.
Update if Zoom hasn't prompted you. It's just ideal to always have it as up to date as possible as they're continuing to make it better and better.
I agree. Thank you for whoever jumped in to say that. That's awesome.
And I think we're done for now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Pamela. All right, so let's move on to how are you going to evaluate these responses? So you've asked them to do papers, you've gotten them to do quizzes and discussion boards. How are you going to evaluate it? We have always used pass-fail with North Georgia and South Georgia. If they've done the work and they haven't shown any major red flags, I pass them. I send them on to Michelle Levan in North Georgia. I send them on to Jay Harris in South Georgia, and I say, they're yours now. I have educated them. Your turn to license them if you feel so led. Other conferences have used grades in the past. It's totally up to you. You can do it either way. The only reason I say this now is, again, you're planning how yours is going to look. You need to plan this in as well. Students will ask, how do I know if I passed or not? I got that question every year by email multiple times, and then they'd ask me again when they showed up in person, how do I know if I passed or not? And so you need to know, how are they going to pass or not? That's up to you. So keep that part in mind. There's value in both. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. It just needs to be consistent among your conference students. I suggest always in evaluations, you should comment on papers, even if it's to the point of great job, right? Like just some sort of feedback is nice. We all like to know that our work hasn't gone off into a huge black hole and nobody's reading it. And then, so that's one thing. Then you absolutely must have people monitoring the discussion boards. This is for a variety of reasons. One, again, you want to be able to catch those red flags from the theology standpoint early and often. Because if one person says something about rebaptism being okay, and I'm just going to keep using that example, by the way. If somebody says something early on about rebaptizing being okay, and you or whoever you got to monitor your discussion boards doesn't catch it until a day or 2 or 3 later, now you've got your other students reading stuff that is totally wrong, could mess them up and get them confused. It is the same thing when people go off into, when you think about when you split them up into small groups in a larger classroom. All the teachers, what do? We put them in small groups and then we start walking around to the small groups, right? You're listening in, you're trying to make sure everybody's kind of on the right page. You can't be in the same place at the same time all the time, but you're kind of keeping an ear out to make sure there's no red flags. That's what this is for. Same kind of concept there. All right. Questions about that?
Amy, we had one question. Somebody wanted to know, do you create or use a covenant for online behavior in licensing school?
We do this year. We did this year. We had a problem last year that I fixed for this year. It's a conduct code. Bishop Goodpastor helped me with it. We came up with it together. We're gonna have to tweak it for online. It was really meant to be in-person conduct code. But we'll have to tweak it for online now. But yes, I highly suggest everybody sign a conduct code before they start. Yep.
And how quickly do you turn papers around?
So we used to do it when the teachers were, our old way of doing things, we would basically give them back to the students when they got to campus because they did all of the papers before they got to campus, and then they get them as the teacher came in to teach. I think that's up to y'all. I'm not sure I'd put super strict parameters on that. Like if you have people helping you read them, I'd give them, I mean, even 2 or 3 weeks is not the end of the world. I mean, they need to have them done by the time the program is done by all means. But if you've decided on a 6-week licensing school program and the papers from week 1 don't get returned until week 3, I think that's fine.
I'm taking one last look.
Yep.
Okay, I did have one question. Is this a straight Zoom session or a Zoom webinar?
This that we're on now? I'm going to assume, maybe?
Can you answer both this and then how you answer your Zoom and licensing school just to be on the safe side?
Okay, so this right now I set up as a Zoom meeting because I don't have access to Zoom webinars. So there's that. And I knew I could record this, so it wasn't a big deal for us to be in a meeting. For licensing school, we, Emory, are not using Zoom at all because Zoom is synchronous and we're not doing synchronous.
I think that answers the question. If it doesn't, we'll
if it doesn't, rewrite the question and tell me where I misread it. Yeah.
Okay. I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay, absolutely. All right. So now on to training. For teachers, I make training mandatory for my teachers. And this goes back to how I am training teachers to teach in licensing school. It has to be mandatory. There's just no way around it, especially if you're doing Zoom synchronous. If they don't know how to use the nonverbal cues that are in Zoom, and by that I mean how to raise a hand, how to say yes or no, how to use the chat box, all of those things, it's going to be a train wreck. I mean, it just will. It just will. You can't go into Zoom and not know how to use it and think you're going to teach well. You won't. Because if they're a bad teacher in the classroom, it will be magnified online. And that only gets worse when you add fun technology to it. I think I'm pretty darn proficient in Zoom, and I just had a problem twice with PowerPoint on my own presentation. So keep that in mind. When things don't go wrong, they need to know, they need to be able to back up and punt, right? Like that's just, they need to know how to do that. So that's for teachers. For students, when it's synchronous, I make it mandatory. For instance, we just moved 3 of our course of study classes for April online. They obviously can't meet in person. I had 3 teachers who wanted to try it, all who had experience before. I had 6 different Zoom practice sessions for students that were mandatory before they were allowed in the class. They had all signed up already, had started their pre-class work. They were on a roll when COVID-19 hit. And all of a sudden I said, If you don't do a Zoom class, you are not allowed to be in this classroom any longer. That was, it's not up for discussion. And the people who did not sign up for a Zoom session, didn't complete it at the end of those, I had 5 originally scheduled. I cut them off from Canvas. Amy was not playing. I meant it. What we cannot have are students who have no idea how to correctly use Zoom when you're in the middle of a large classroom session. Unacceptable. It will totally derail the class. Your teacher will be frustrated. The other students will be frustrated. Not a great idea. Asynchronous, you don't need that because they're doing it on their own time. If they're having a problem, then that's when they're most likely going to call you or troubleshoot. If you have somebody who's helping with troubleshooting, it's no big deal if they can't open the video at 10 o'clock on Tuesday night because it's not live. They can watch it at 10 o'clock the next morning too when you show them what went wrong with the video. No big deal. Tech producers are the third thing. I kind of alluded to this on another slide. I was on the tech team for Candler and the emergency task force to get Candler's classes moved online for over 1 week while the students were on spring break. The thing that we realized very quickly, somebody else realized, which was a brilliant decision, and I have now totally decided she was right, that we would have tech producers in every class. These are students who are not students of the class that they're sitting in on, mainly because we don't want them to be trying to learn at the same time we want them to work. So what I'm doing for licensing school is I have 4 Candler students who will be out of school at the time, and their whole job is to sit in on different, I'm sorry, not for licensing school, for the April online classes that are synchronous. They're going to be sitting in on those classrooms so that students can contact them directly and ask tech questions while the class is still going on, so that any tech problems that an individual student is having, that's being taken care of on the side. The school, the class, the teacher, all still going without being interrupted. In my opinion, this is a necessity. You need somebody on, if you're going to do synchronous for licensing school, you need somebody on the call who is not the teacher and not a student to help you with things, just like Pamela is helping me right now. This is invaluable because I'm not watching the chat box at all right now. I don't have it up on my screen because when you're presenting material and you're trying to teach, it is incredibly distracting to see a scrolling chat, right? That's just, I can't look there and look here at the same time. So to have somebody who's helping with that is a true joy, and I'm incredibly grateful. And by the way, thank you, Pamela. If I haven't said it enough today, that's awesome. This is a huge service for me, and you need that as well. The other thing that we're doing is that the tech producers are monitoring student participation. And again, I'm using course of study for an example for this because our licensing school does not do this. So please remember that part. My course of study classes that are online on Zoom, synchronous, for the sections that are online, we are, they're in charge, the tech producers are in charge of watching the participant box. If you have not read about how to see if your students are still on the Zoom call on their screen, look into it. It's awesome. It's very Big Brother, Russia circa 1950s, but I love every minute of it. I love it. It's going to help us grade class participation. And I have told our students, because I am a loving and grace-filled gal right up until you try to cheat. I've told all of them on those mandatory Zoom practice sessions with me, I am watching you. We can tell when you go off the Zoom screen, your class participation grade will be affected. They all laughed and we all laughed together. And then I went, no, seriously, it's going to be affected. Don't do it. I'm not going to feel bad for you. I'm not going to ask questions. You're just going to get deduction. So bam. Available. The other thing is that they're available. And I kind of said this a little bit earlier. The tech producer is available for private chats so that the class isn't getting interrupted. So these are the reasons I think it's invaluable to have a tech producer, whatever you want to call them. We call them tech producers, but because that's what they're doing. But I find it invaluable. So yeah. Questions about training? Any one of these 3 categories?
I haven't had anything new come in so far. I'm just kind of
Okay.
watching for a minute,
Oh, that's
but
awesome.
if I get anything, then we may tackle it on the next one if that's okay.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. So moving on to specific training for students. This is exactly what I showed them in our our mandatory Zoom practice sessions. I broke it into 3 sessions, and we're going to go through all of them. So before calling in, when you get on the call, and during the call. So what I tell them is before calling in, you need to minimize background noise as best as possible. Turn your phone to silent or vibrate. Don't put it near the computer. A lot of old computers, and some of you know this, older computers or older phones will, you'll get the lovely little jiggly effect, right, if you have them too close together. I always jokingly tell them to get all their family members off of the internet before trying to be on with us. If you have lots of people on the internet in your house, it's just going to be slower. It's just life. I mean, so as much as I told them to just bribe their kids with something else for a little while. I always try to teach them to sit facing a window. Natural light is always better than artificial. You will see that I am facing a window in my house. If you have the window behind you, you get blacked out completely and they can't see your face at all. Right now, I have no artificial lights on in my room. It is just the natural light coming from the window. So my joke is, look toward the light. The answer is always Jesus. Look toward the light. If they're going to use a laptop, I prefer not to use tablets. Tablets don't work as well in some things. We've had some issues with Zoom with tablets. With all of the features we need students to use, I should put it that way. It's great if you're just sitting in on a meeting watching somebody, but the second you have to start raising your hand and being in the chat box and trying to watch a screen share, it starts to get, I've been told by students, it's more difficult than it needs to be. So I've been trying to keep people on desktops and laptops. So I tell them to prop a laptop up on a table so that they're looking in the camera. For instance, I'm using a laptop right now and it's propped up on 2 huge photo albums that I have, and it's perfect because I am directly staring into the camera, and that's what we want them to be doing. And then I just kind of nicely remind them, do everything you do before a real class. It's different when they're in an online class because I've got my bathroom like 5 feet from me, things like that. They're going to forget that they should do all that. When they get on the call, I tell them to do 4 things. They need to turn on their videos. I don't let students in synchronous classes, unless they have a video. I have made that rule. You do not have to make that rule, but I need to be able to see that they are actively engaged, and you cannot tell that if they are on the phone. Personal opinion, that's how we do it. They have to turn on their video. They have to turn off their microphone and only turn it on when they are being called on to speak. Then I ask them to open the participant box and open the chat box. We open the participant box because I want them to make sure their name appears the way they want it to. If it doesn't, there's a way that you can edit it. So we go through the process, even if their name is perfect. I show all of them how to edit their name. And I ask them just first, last name. I want Amy Walker. I want capitalization on the A and the W. What I don't want is them signing on with AWalkie8, which is my passcode for Emory, my net ID for Emory. That doesn't tell the teacher what to call you, what your first name is, what your last name is. It makes it a lot harder on the teacher and your fellow students to know what you want to be called. So we do all 4 of these things when we start classes together. And then during the call, I teach them about gallery view and speaker view. Gallery view is when everybody is the same, all the icons are the same. It's the Brady Bunch or Hollywood Squares version. And I tell them that it's best when there is a big class discussion going on and you want to be able to see multiple people's faces at the same time. That's perfect for gallery view. Speaker view is best when somebody is sharing the screen and when the teacher is lecturing on their own and you just kind of need to focus on them by themselves. I also talk to them about when to mute their video. If they're going to get up, and I've done this before in meetings as well, if it's going on for a while and I need to stretch, I mute my video. Nobody needs to see me stretch on camera. They just don't. You need to run to the bathroom, mute your video, then go to the bathroom. You'll be fine. if we do, and I've told them, if your video is muted for more than like 10 minutes, the tech producer is trained to to private chat you and find out if everything's okay, right? Like, has something gone wrong? Are you sick? Are you slacking off? Like, what? We're gonna call you. We're gonna call you out, not in front of everybody else, privately, if you've been gone too long from the class. We teach them to use nonverbal response functions in the participant box. That is so that they don't interrupt the teacher. It helps a lot if they can raise their hand in that. For those of you who have, I'm sure most of you have been host of Zoom calls now, that raise hand function is, I love it. It's beautiful. It allows the teacher to see who needs help quickly, but also allows them to get to the end of a sentence or the end of a thought before they have to stop and answer questions. And then, like I said, during the class sessions, we tell them, if you have a technical problem, send the private chat to the technical producer. And we name the technical producer in the participant box. We rename them to say, tech producer, parentheses, Amy. So they know the person's first name and who they're talking to, but it's also incredibly easy to find in the participant box when they're trying to find them at that time. All right, so that's what I do for training for students. And I know that is a lot. That's basically just a lot of best practices that I have found, and I am learning every day new things to add to this. But I'm happy to answer any questions about training students if we have any.
One person brought up a point that during these shelter-in-place days with people working from home, it may not be possible for some family members to get off the internet.
Absolutely.
Is that just something that a student should deal with on a case-by-case basis?
Yep.
Okay. And then one person brought up that some cultures may need more person-to-person direction than other cultures.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips on how to deal with that?
Yeah, I think if you're doing the mandatory Zoom practice sessions, you're going to figure that out really quickly. And I don't think that that's necessarily just bound to people who are having cultural differences. I think that's people with technology differences as well. If you're having somebody who really truly doesn't understand where the option bar is on the bottom of the Zoom screen and just can't get there to mute their video or can't figure out how to raise their hand despite the fact that you've taught them a couple of times, I think that's something I'll say I had one person that I asked to stay on when everybody else got off the meeting. And when it was just me and him on the meeting at the end of the practice session, I said, let's just go over everything again. Tell me where you were having some issues so that we can really dig deep here and figure out how best to help you.
Okay. Somebody had a question of how can you tell who switches off their screen?
So there's this in the participants box. You can only tell this if you're a host, by the way. So you always need to make sure your tech producer is a co-host. In the participant box, next to the person's name, to the left of the person's name, it's a little, I think it's a clock. It's a little circle. You can look it up on Google Zoom. Something about participation monitoring or something like that. They'll show you on Zoom where it is. It's brilliant. It doesn't tell you what they're watching. It just tells you that they have navigated off of the Zoom call. Still on the computer, but they're now on Facebook. Yeah.
How do you work with someone whose first language isn't English?
Very patiently. If their first language is not English, and it's to the point that they do not understand the textbooks that they're reading or the lectures that they're listening to, that's when I pull in their DS and their conference rep. And again, I'm coming at this, I'm not conference staff anywhere. So that's why I go directly to the DS and the conference rep and I say, here's where we're having some issues. This person needs some additional help. We come up with a plan, and sometimes that plan is that they should not be licensed until they have taken maybe some English as a second language classes, either online or through a community college nearby. We come up with something that allows them to not be frustrated. Because the thing that breaks my heart in those situations is seeing a person who is so excited about being a minister and they just can't get through it. They know, I mean, I put myself in their shoes. If I was trying to be a minister in France and trying to learn French, I don't know French. How frustrating would that be for me? How anxiety producing that would be for me, right? So that's what I do. I pull in the people that are that have a dog in this fight with this lovely person, and we talk through how that's going to work. And you have to do it on a case by case basis, and it takes time, and it's hard, and it's worth it.
And then one person said, you are not running PowerPoint, but just changing slides in the side panel, correct?
I am, because I think I accidentally messed something up on the screen share feature, but I don't know what I did wrong. So I'm happy to tell you that I did something wrong, but this way I can still show you the slides because there's a lot of information on them. Yeah.
I have not had anything new pop up, so I think we're good this time.
Perfect.
Thank you.
We're closing up on the end of it anyway, so we'll do general questions. This is the last technical slide right here, and this is how to calculate contact hours. So what I was told when I was first learning to do this at Candler 4 years ago, we started moving all of our stuff online. I met with our online director of online learning. And the best thing she told me was, these are all, by the way, best practices that she learned in her PhD program in online learning. But she said, be consistent. She said, just be consistent. Keep track of how you're doing everything so that you can always see how you gave credit to what section, right? So if you're going through these, we'll look at videos that are asynchronous. To get the contact hours, you do running time and you multiply it by 2. When she first told me about this, I thought, wow, this is like cheating. Like, how are you allowed to get away with this? And she just laughed and she said, when you get into it, you're not going to think that. And I definitely don't now. When you have an asynchronous video, there is no tech problems. That teacher gets to talk for 15 minutes. And I'm just going to use 15 as an example, 15 minutes straight. There's no interruptions. There's no problems with moving anything around. No students ask questions. There's no rabbit trails by the student or the teacher. They are literally getting in 15 minutes of pure content. That does not happen in a real classroom setting. My favorite thing, the first year we started transitioning course of study teachers over, is that they would tell me, there is no way I'm not going to be able to do this. Like, I'm going to have too much material. I'm going to have too much material. And I was like, fine, then we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, right? Just start. Then they would all come back to me, and a couple of them had over 3 hours of material covered in 45 minutes online. They said, I'm out of material. Now I don't have enough online content. And it's because no one was interrupting them. Everything is very organized because they've thought it through. They're not going off the cuff. It's very condensed. So that's why we do running time times 2. The other reason is that a lot of times, especially I found in our theology and Bible classes, students rewatch the videos multiple times. And they tell me that all the time. And it's because some of these concepts are big and they're trying to get their heads wrapped around it. And so they listen to it once and they might have missed something. So they watch it again, and they might even watch it again to try to fix stuff. For licensing school, one of the first subject matters that I put online for us was tradition. Bishop Goodpastor does all of our 8 hours for us. And what we were finding was that 8 hours of tradition in a classroom setting makes everyone want to light their hair on fire. The teacher, the students, the administrators, it's a lot. It is so dense, and he does such a great job. I mean, we were talking, he is an A+ teacher, A+. I wanted to listen to this man speak for 8 hours, but it was so dense. So what we did was we took 4 of those hours and we moved them online. And the other 4 hours he was still doing in person. And that was perfect. The students, we had longer time to talk about bigger subjects. So that's what you do for videos that are asynchronous. For meeting time, if you decide you're going to do synchronous classes via Zoom, or even sections that are synchronous, that is just straight up actual time met. So if you're going to meet for 30 minutes of contact time for licensing school, and that's how long your Zoom session is, that's 30 minutes of contact time. Whereas you could have taken that 30, if you did take that 30 minutes, you only need a 15-minute video to fulfill that 30 minutes of contact time, because it's 15 times 2. With discussion boards, the lowest amount of contact time I ever put towards a discussion board is 30 minutes. I absolutely go up to 60 minutes if it's a difficult question that is going to require a lot for their responses to their other 2 people, right? So if it's a pretty cut and dry kind of discussion that I don't think is going to take a lot of time, or it's something that we just want to know what their best practices are that they've experienced in their own churches, that's something I'm going to give them like 30 minutes, right? Like, this shouldn't take you very long. It's not very difficult to think through. There's no research involved. It's just your personal reflection. That's usually in the 30-minute range. If it's something much deeper, I'm going to give them 60 minutes, because it's going to take a while for them to write it all out, and then find 2 other people to talk to as well. With quizzes, same thing. Please note, I put on both quizzes and discussion boards depending on difficulty. Again, most of our quizzes are only 50. I think actually all of our quizzes this year are only 15 minutes of contact time. For course of study, they go longer when they're more difficult or have lots more questions to them. We've gone up to 30 minutes for that. Papers and readings do not get any contact hours. You are not allowed to assign online contact hours to papers and readings. So my rule of thumb is, if you would normally do it inside the classroom, it can count as contact hours. That's why papers and readings don't count. Papers and readings are always done outside of the classroom. I've never met a teacher that said, for the next 4 hours, you're going to write a paper while we're sitting together in class, but nobody's talking to each other. So that's kind of how I decide when I start talking to teachers about how we're going to break up their classes. We talk through, oh, hey, this is actually when I usually send them off into small groups in different places. Say, great, that's a discussion board. That's what you do a discussion board for. Yeah. Any questions about online contact hours? And actually, I'm going to open it up to any questions, because that's the end of the presentation.
Okay. Well, 2 that just came in. One was contact hours for demonstrations. What would you classify that as?
Yep, that's great. So I don't have it on here because this is the first year I've had to do that, because we don't normally do demos on, like I said, I normally am a huge fan of putting that in person. This year I'm going to give, I've been debating 1 or 2 hours for the preaching demos, even when they're only preaching 20-minute sermons, because they are going to do this multiple times. And so I want to honor that time and be respectful of it. So I haven't decided for sure, but it will, at the minimum, it'll be an hour. At the minimum, it will be an hour.
Okay, and then our next question was, for the asynchronous videos, do the teachers use PowerPoint as well?
Yep. And we have what I do for asynchronous videos is I use a program. It's just a website. I love it. Camtasia. It's pretty cheap. I think we only spend like $200 a year on it, maybe. I usually record them either, I like recording them in my office. That's where we do most of my recordings, actually. But right now we can't. I'm having to record on Zoom. When you record on Zoom, you get an MP4 file for video and audio, which is what we want when we're doing these videos. And then Camtasia allows me to insert their slides so that it looks super professional. I cut off the beginning and the end where normally I'm talking to them about setup and stuff like that. Camtasia editing is so simple and beautiful. Big, huge fan.
One question was, if our annual conference wanted to do part of your online content but not all of it, could we? And if so, would the cost be prorated?
We had not discussed that before. Since Pamela knows whoever you are that asked that question, I'll get, as soon as I talk to my big boss, I will find out. We hadn't thought about that. We'd only done the full program.
Okay.
I'm not close to it. We need to think that through. Yeah.
And for the program that you just mentioned, Camtasia, can we just confirm Camtasia?
That's exactly right. Yep.
Okay. And then we had a question at the beginning that we had put off to the end. How can an annual conference connect to use Candler's online licensing school?
Email me. Yeah, you're going to email me directly. My email address is Amy. Actually, Pamela, can you put my email address in the chat box?
Yes.
It's amy.elizabeth.walker@emory.edu. And if you're interested in that, I'm happy to talk you through it. We've had quite a few people doing it with us this year.
Okay. And just really quick while I had the floor, somebody had asked earlier if we could post a link to licensing school course names and what each covers. I'm posting a link from the Boom library.
Oh, great. Thank you for doing that.
I post that earlier because I didn't want it to get lost in the chat, but that should be going in the chat now in case anybody wants to grab it.
And quick note, if at the bottom of your participant box, to the right of the file icon, there are 3 horizontal dots. If you click on that, you can save chat. So you can save the chat box from this meeting.
Okay. I do have somebody who wanted to know what to submit to get GBHEM approval online. I wanted to let you know that I'm going to actually submit that question to my director, and I'll have them get back in contact with you directly.
Great.
And then,
all I did was email. They have a new email address that's been really helpful, theologicaleducation@gbhem.org. That's what I did, and then Shannon wrote back through that, I think.
Thank you.
It was pretty easy is my point. It's not like it, yeah.
And then one person wanted to know if you could share some tips and tricks for how students can be good online learners.
So everything I mentioned in the training session, those 3 slides on how to train students to be ready for class, that's how they're good online learners. If they follow those kind of rules, they set themselves up for success. If they make sure you have properly communicated the amount of time they need to devote. I am a very big stickler on, if I said we're starting at noon, we're starting at noon. And that is something that I try to respect with online as well. If we said noon, I start at noon. If I said the end time is 2, we're ending at 2. And that helps them, especially right now, especially with people having children at home, they have other jobs to deal with, they might have spouses around. That's going to help them tell their spouse, maybe who's dealing with the kids for 2 hours, hey, I got to close the door for 2 hours, but then I'll take the kids for the next 2 hours, So I try to be super respectful of their time with that because they need to focus on just that. I don't think it's good pedagogy in general to only have one delivery method. For instance, I mentioned 4 that we go back and forth between, and we do that on purpose because some students are really good at taking quizzes and they love tests, and that's how they do well. And some students need to talk things out, right? That's a good discussion board. Some students need to write. They like to take the time to be organized in their thought, so that's why we use papers. The more you can mix those up so that you're actively working with different groups of learners, that's helpful. That's the other reason I am a huge fan of, so for instance, I am a horrible auditory learner. If you are only telling me something and you're not showing it to me, I am not going to remember it. I start thinking of other things and I've zoned out, which is why with my teachers, we are huge fans of slides and screens. So especially when we're doing asynchronous videos, I go back and forth between what we call talking head, which is the full screen of just the teacher, and then we throw in slides, especially when they're listing, if they're doing timeline of dates, if they're reading scripture, if they're reading any quote at all, we put it on the screen so that people like me who are more visual learners can read along while they hear it, and that tends to help. But the more you can vary delivery platforms, that's how you're going to start reaching all of your students and keep them engaged because they're not bored. I mean, nobody wants to sit in on a 4-hour synchronous Zoom meeting. Nobody wants to do that. So don't do that to your students, right? It's kind of like use your common sense. If you don't want to do it, they don't either. So, yeah.
Someone asked, back to your 4 to 7 week timeline, what is the exact period that runs through? How do you handle anyone not completed by normal appointment / licensing time?
Great. So the way I'm working it with the conferences that are working with me is that when I speak with them, I say, what is your deadline for your annual conference? And that change, first of all, every annual conference meets somewhere different, right? At different times during June, mainly. I've had some conferences that they've already delayed them up until August. And so they're like, we've got more time because we used to meet in June, but now we're meeting in August. So an appointment start on July 1st for us. So as long as we get them done in the middle of June, I'm fine, right? So that's what I take their, what is your end date that you need all the materials gathered for each student to be able to say, yes, we're going to license you, and then back it up from there. For me, again, there's 80 contact hours for licensing school. For me, 4 weeks, in my opinion, was the minimum to give students to do this in. That's 20 hours a week, plus, remember, readings and papers. And we don't have a ton of readings. So you saw my book list. Most of that's reference. But to me, 20 hours a week, it's significant, right? It's doable in a month, and you can tell yourself to just kind of put your head down, and the next month is going to be rough, right? That's just how it works. But you're also, I try to remind people as well, if the second I hear anybody kind of not happy about that, the fact of the matter is you're not having to come on campus for 8 to 10 days to do this any longer. You're at home. You didn't have to take any vacation time from work. There are some pretty significant trade-offs with this. I think in a perfect world, I would probably do this over 6 weeks. If you have time to do it over 6 weeks, some conferences don't. I know 2 of my conferences are doing 4 weeks. Most of them are doing 5, which I also think is great. A couple are doing 6, and 1 is doing 7 because they had the time to give their people and they wanted it. The longer you can draw it out, the more it becomes like a normal online college class where it's not fire hose season. They're not having to just listen. The other way, and I didn't mention this, but it could be important or helpful. What I've chosen to do with ours is every conference had to pick a Friday that they wanted to start, because what I'll do is I will send out the amount of assignments appropriate for that conference on Friday. Every conference gets their new assignments on Fridays, and it's all due the next Friday. That way you have everybody working together that is on the discussion boards together specifically, but they're all learning the same material at the same pace. There really is no reason anybody should be left behind. That being said, somebody will get left behind because that's life. But I've set it up with a lot of grace involved, that if you get your assignments on Friday and you know that Saturday, that next day is awesome for you, you're open all day, it's going to work, you can sit at home all day Saturday and do it all if you want, right? Or do it Sunday after work because you know your work week is going to be bad. Do it all that weekend, no big deal. But if you want to spread it out, which is better, you can spread it out throughout the week. It's not due till Friday. So there's a lot of freedom in it. It is completely up to you as the conference to decide how you're going to help people if they get left behind. If it's something huge, like a death in the family, that might be something you say, hey, you're going to need, they might ask you to take a step back and step out of it. And then that's when, that's kind of the glory of conferencing too, though, right? Like if you have somebody lose a family member and they can't finish yours, you can always start talking to other conferences and saying, hey, what are you doing? Can this person come? We're going to drop them from ours so that they can grieve and be with their family. And then can we put them in yours instead, kind of thing. So that's happened to us multiple times.
Okay. Somebody wanted to know if you're still going to go through a best practices section, or were best practices covered with what you interspersed here and there during the session?
Interspersed.
Okay. Do you do all the filming yourself when you're not in lockdown mode, or do you have staff that helps you?
I did it all myself because I'm crazy. Yeah, I actually enjoy it. That's the silly thing. I had no idea that, I have a bachelor's in journalism and a master of divinity, and I never knew I would learn this much about filming and editing videos. I have a couple of students, Candler students, who help me edit when I need help with editing, but I always do the filming myself because I can hear what the teachers are saying. And a couple of them have messed up on silly stuff, like they accidentally date their videos. You never want to mention the day of the week, the weather, or the president, my kind of thing, because we can use them again. If you don't date them, we can keep using them and you don't have to redo them. So I tend to sit in on filming, all the filming. And then if I get overwhelmed with the editing, I have people I pay to help me out with it, who want extra money, by the way. They're college students, so yeah.
There was a question that was about online learning, but not necessarily licensing schools. Somebody wanted to know if they could get a sample of a course of study online learning syllabus. Could they just contact you directly?
Yeah.
Okay, at the email address we put in earlier?
Yep.
Okay. Those were all the questions that I had in the chat. If I have missed something, please shoot it to me again. It was rolling fairly fast, but I tried to pull out what I had.
Okay, we'll give it one more minute for any last chat questions. This is what I'm going to end with. Just breathe. This is a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. I would be lying if I didn't say I've had at least 2 completely breakdown crying sessions over this. It is hard to do this. It is worth it. I have found a whole significant love of education. I have found a new respect for our students and our teachers who are having to completely redo things that none of us thought we would be in the situation. Nobody in February thought we would be here. The best thing, in my opinion, is that I always tell myself is be kind to myself, to my teachers, and to my students. I answer a lot of the same questions over and over and over and over and over and over again. And it's because it's all new. And the more you can remember to breathe and remember whatever you do to help them is helping them, right? Like, it's just do the best you can mode. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't have to be perfect. Please do not hear me when I say I edit all of our videos, that now you should start filming and editing all of your videos. Please also hear the fact that YouTube has some awesome material on it. I do suggest, like I said, we're using United Methodist filmed stuff from boards and agencies. So I know it's all good to go. If you ever have a question about an external source, then that's something you want to run by GBHEM for approval, not by me. I'm running my stuff by them too. But there's some really great material out there that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. My favorite thing that the woman who was running our emergency task force at Candler told us was, she said, this is not the time to try to learn all of the best practices for online learning. This is the time to figure out how to get it done and keep everybody's head above water. And if that's all you keep above water, if the rest of them is submerged, if the rest of you is submerged, that's fine. Just keep everybody above water, and this is going to go away. This is temporary. So just remember to breathe, because I'm still remembering to breathe too. Any final?
I haven't had any more questions, but everybody is saying thank you.
You're very welcome.
You do, Candler, very proud.
Oh, that's sweet.
Blessings. So
I right back to you all. Thank you for being a part of this. Please know that I'm praying for all of you. We have your names, and I prayed over y'all before this started. I know how hard it is. Good luck. You're going to do great. You're going to do great. So I'm going to close this in prayer, and then we'll end the meeting. Gracious God, thank you for this time that you've given us. As we all walk away from this and start thinking through our own best practices for our own context and how we can make it through this crazy time we're in right now, I pray that you cover us with peace and ease our frustrations over technology, our anxieties over technology, all of these things. God, I pray that you grant us your peace that only you can grant us, that we know at the end of the day, gosh, our hearts are in the right place. Our students' hearts are in the right place. Our teachers' hearts are in the right place. We will get through this, and we will get through this together, and we will get together through this with you. And we love you, and we thank you for that. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Nice to meet you guys. Have a good day.